Hello, I'm Larry Wilson. Please join me for another 15-minute Bible study. This is part 3 in our study on dating the crucifixion and death of Jesus, and if necessary, please watch this video segment twice. In the previous segment, we found 2 different feasts of Passover were observed during the week that Jesus died. We also found that observing Passover at the appointed time is necessary to avoid sinning against God. Since Jesus never sinned, we have to conclude that Jesus and his disciples observed Passover at the appointed time, and the nation of Israel did not. So how did the nation of Israel go wrong? It is believed that after the Babylonian captivity, Israel's leaders adopted the Babylonian method for determining the first day of a new month, and ironically, most Jews and Muslims rely on this method today. The difference between God's method for starting a new month and the Babylonian method is usually 2 days. I will explain both methods in a moment, but before I do, I would like to show that determining the proper date for Passover has been a controversy for centuries, and the root of this controversy centers around the question, when does a new moon occur? Does it occur at conjunction, or does it occur at the appearing of a new moon crescent? In case you have forgotten 6th grade science, conjunction occurs when the centers of the sun, moon, and earth fall in a straight line. At conjunction, a new moon is not visible because there is no light shining on the side of the moon that faces earth. Julius Caesar hated the variances that go with solar-lunar calendars, and this led him to outlaw them, and he established a universal calendar in 45 BC, which had nothing to do with the sun or the moon. And in fact, we still use his calendar today, even though it was slightly modified in 1582. At the present time, a month begins because Julius said so, and New Year's Day occurs because Julius said so. There is no other reason for determining the beginning of a month or a year at the present time. But God's calendar is different. God's calendar is not limited to man's decrees. Because God required Israel to observe new moon feasts from the northern tip to the southern tip of the nation, how could all of the Israelites determine when a new moon feast should be held, since long-distance communication was impossible? I'll explain this in just a moment, but for now, I want you to consider the fact that there was an ongoing controversy about the arrival of a new moon within Israel, and this controversy was widely known because this conflict affected the observance of all feasts, including the Feast of Passover. When Constantine became the emperor of the Roman Empire, he was caught up in an early Christian controversy. For 300 years, there had been a simmering argument among Christians as to when Easter should be observed. Some Christians wanted to observe the date of Christ's resurrection. But the problem with observing a date is that a specific date creeps through the week, like your birthday. And celebrating the Lord's resurrection on a Tuesday did not seem right when he was resurrected on a Sunday. Other Christians wanted to celebrate the Sunday that followed Passover, but Christians in Rome firmly rejected this idea for 2 reasons. First, Easter Sunday would be determined by the Jews whom they despised, and 2, they thought it totally inappropriate that the murderers of Jesus should determine when the resurrection of Jesus should be celebrated. Well, finally, Constantine insisted the ruckus must come to an end. Constantine wanted the observance of Easter to have nothing to do with the Jewish Passover. Notice his reasoning. Quote, "They, the Jews," he's speaking of, "do not possess the truth in this Easter question, for in their blindness and repugnance to all improvement. They frequently celebrate 2 Passovers in the same year. And you see, here's the reference written by Eusebius. Well, in AD 325, the Council of Nicaea finally laid down the law. Now, I am paraphrasing the law, but it goes like this. Easter would be observed on the first Sunday after the first full moon occurring on or after the spring equinox. Moreover, Easter will be delayed by 1 week if a full moon happens to fall on Sunday, because Easter must not fall on the same day as Passover. Okay, we've looked into the Easter controversy to underscore a historical fact. It was not uncommon for the Jews to observe 2 Passovers in the same month because 2 different calendars were used. When Jesus was on earth, a small number of people in Israel used God's method to determine a new month. But the nation of Israel used the Babylonian method to determine the arrival of a new moon and a new month. So when weather permitted, the Babylonian method worked out in a very simple way, and it served to concentrate authority in Jerusalem. The high priest declared the first day of each month, so everyone knew exactly when the first day of each month began, and this was good for business in Jerusalem. Okay, let me show you some pictures of a new moon cycle so that you can get an idea of what we're talking about visually. You see, at 2 days after conjunction, this little sliver is called the first crescent of a waxing moon. And on the 3rd day, of course, the sliver is larger. And as we get down to 8.4 days, we have a quarter moon. Half of the moon is illumined. And then we see around the 14th and 15th day full moons. And then as the lunar cycle continues, the moon begins to wane. And soon the last crescent of the waning moon is seen at around 27 days, approximately. So you can see by looking at the pictures of the moon that we have the sighting of this first crescent, which occurs about 2 days after conjunction. That is, conjunction is where you can't see the moon because there is no light shining on the face of the moon that is toward Earth. We know that God's method for determining the arrival of a new moon is also simple, even though a new moon cannot be seen at conjunction. God's method for the arrival of a new moon is simply based on alternating cycles of 29 and 30 days. The ancients knew that a lunar cycle is 29.5 days in length. Therefore, 2 lunar cycles amount to 59 days. So, 1 month had 29 days, and the following month had 30 days. This alternation was easy to record, and new moon feasts remain aligned with the moon by simply alternating the length of months by 1 day. Every 3 years, a correction of 1 day was needed, but this correction was not a problem in ancient times because every 3rd year there were 13 months in that year called Adar 2, and this is when the correction was made, something like our leap years, which usually occur every 4 years. Well, the operation of these 2 calendars explains why 2 Passovers were observed during the week Jesus was crucified. 2 different methods for starting a new month explains why these Passovers were 2 days apart. So recapping what we've learned, Jesus and his disciples observed Passover at the appointed time before he was crucified. The nation of Israel observed Passover on the day after Jesus was crucified. The Jews considered their Passover to be a special Sabbath because their Passover and the seventh-day Sabbath aligned. And finally, we know that Jesus was resurrected on Sunday, the first day of the week. And when these four facts are brought together, we have a lockdown on timing. This lockdown, with respect to the days of the week, enables us to precisely determine the year of Christ's death. All that remains is the task of locating the positions of the sun and the moon, and that will support the first Passover on a Thursday and a second Passover on a Sabbath. To do this, we will use well-studied data from the U.S. Naval Observatory. Several astronomers have researched the positions of the sun and moon during the time Jesus could have been on Earth, so we have orbital geometry that has been tested several times and is very accurate. I have selected a period of 7 years during which Jesus could have died. I will demonstrate later on why he has to die within these 7 years when we study the Jubilee calendar, but for now and for purposes of discussion, just consider that these dates are valid. In case you have forgotten, we are looking for a conjunction that takes place on a Thursday because Jesus and his disciples observed Passover on a Thursday. And I want to say this about the U.S. Naval Observatory report that we're going to be referring to. This report provides new moon dates and equinox dates and full moon dates for this period of time that is of interest. I have adjusted these times to Jerusalem time because the U.S. Naval Observatory times are given in Universal or Greenwich Mean Time. So I have adjusted them for Jerusalem time. Also, I have adjusted them for a day in God's calendar is from sundown to sundown. Okay, so I've adjusted for Jerusalem time, and I've adjusted because in God's calendar a day goes from sundown to sundown. In AD 27, conjunction occurred on March 26 at 7 p.m., which was a Thursday. Again, in AD 30, on March 22nd at 8 p.m. Jerusalem local time, it was a Thursday when a new moon conjunction occurred. So we have, out of this 7-year period, 2 years that are possible candidates for the year of Christ's death, where the Passover was observed by Jesus and his disciples on Thursday night, and then using the sighting of the first crescent 2 days later, puts the observance on Sabbath for the Jews. So there are only 2 possible dates out of this list that will work, AD 27 and AD 30, and we have to rule out AD 27 because of Luke 3:1. Luke 3:1 tells us that Jesus is baptized in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea. Later on, I will explain to you how the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar began in the fall of AD 27. This is when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, and I will also address in the next segment the comment made by Jesus that he would spend 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. So therefore, we're stuck. The only qualifying year that has a Thursday conjunction and a Thursday Passover is AD 30. We're going to look at a calendar right now from 2015, January of this year, and I want you to see how the days of the week and the days of the month lay out. So look at this calendar for a second. I have put on the screen January 2015, and you see this year, New Year's Day fell on a Thursday. The first day of the new year fell on a Thursday. I have chosen this calendar because this Thursday, New Year's Day, this month, January 2015, all lines up identically with New Year's Day in the month of Abib in AD 30. What I'm saying is that in AD 30, there was a new moon on Thursday. This became New Year's Day because it is the first new moon on or after the spring equinox. And we notice that Passover is eaten on Thursday night at midnight. So that puts Abib 15, AD 30, right on target. And the Jews then observed their Passover 2 days later on Sabbath, which would be Abib or Nisan 17, according to God's calendar. And think of this calendar. Let's scratch out January, and let's think of this as the month of Abib. So you see how they slaughtered the Passover lamb at twilight, they roasted it, and then they ate it at midnight. And then after eating, Jesus and his disciples at daybreak go out and spend all day, Thursday light, on the Mount of Olives. Jesus is arrested and taken to Caiaphas Friday night. And then Friday morning, remember, night before light? On Friday morning, Jesus is taken to Pilate, and then at 9 o'clock, he is crucified. So we see a perfect fit with data from the U.S. Naval Observatory for AD 30, and it's the only year in which this lockdown of events can transpire as the Bible indicates. So given all that we've studied thus far, everything lines up. Using God's calendar, God's method of measuring a day from sundown to sundown, starting a month at conjunction, observing what Jesus and his disciples did, and knowing that Jesus never sinned, so Jesus is right on time, observing Passover at the appointed time. Jesus ate Passover on Nisan 15 at midnight. He was crucified on Friday, Nisan 16, and he came from the tomb on Sunday, Nisan 18, AD 30. Well, I'm out of time. Please bookmark and share this video with your friends and proceed to the final segment. We're going to bring all these details together, and once you see how they all line up, you will see there's really no wiggle room left. May God bless you, is my prayer.